This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 28, Authenticity. Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast. This is the show where we help you attract and retain business through the power of quality content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is July 18th, 2013. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for episode 28 of the Content Marketing Podcast. Oh my gosh, this year is flying by. I can hardly believe it. Just a reminder, we are live on iTunes, so if you're listening to this episode on the blog or on Spreaker, you can click on over and subscribe, and you'll get new episodes automatically delivered to your computer or your smartphone or your listening device of choice. And if you have an Android or another device that does not sync with iTunes, we also have an RSS feed, and I will provide that link in the blog post. Last week, we had a terrific conversation on content curation with Tom George, who is the CEO of the popular curation site, Internet Billboards. Tom had a lot of insights to share about what content curation really is, what makes a good curator, and why we content marketers might want to start adding curation to our bag of tricks. Lots and lots of good stuff. So if you happen to miss that episode, feel free to click on over to iTunes or to the RSS feed and get all caught up. So that brings me to today's topic, authenticity. Hey folks, before I get to today's topic, I really need to ask for your help with something. I am planning the podcast topics for the rest of the year, for the rest of 2013, and I really want to hear your ideas. I want to hear what you're interested in hearing on the podcast, especially if there are any experts that you'd like to hear from in interviews. You know, I love doing these interviews, and it just presents such a fresh perspective on things. So if you know of a thought leader in content marketing or in a related industry, maybe even someone who has a book coming out that they're interested in promoting, I would love to hear about that. Please let me know. You can reach me on email, rachel@resonancecontent.com, or you can find my various social outposts at our website, resonancecontent.com. Thank you in advance. I so appreciate it. Okay, on to today's business. Now, today we're going to talk about authenticity. And it's no secret that in this day and age, the old approach of presenting this overly polished, photoshopped, picture perfect, we have no problems, we have the answers to everything image just does not sit well with today's consumers. Today's consumers really want to know and trust you before they do business with you. And to do that, they need to see some authenticity. They don't want to see the glossy, airbrushed, as we used to say, image. They really want to know who you are, what you represent, and then if they know and like what they see, they are much more likely to do business with you. And this, like I said, this is nothing new. This is a trend that has been coming for a long time. And, in fact, recently I was at a luncheon for the BMA, Business Marketing Association, and the guest was a VP of marketing at a very large company in the energy industry. And she actually said, I have asked our agency to stop color correcting our videos. They produce some videos, which is, they're recruiting tools, and their employees just kind of talking to the camera. And they go into a lot of work to make sure that these videos are spontaneous and not scripted. And she has actually requested that these videos not be color corrected because she said they look too fake, and people saw them as a commercial and not as an actual person talking to the camera. So I thought that was a really interesting perspective. But anyway, so as a result of this trend, authenticity has become a huge buzzword. And as happens so often with buzzwords, it's just tossed around with abandon. And sometimes it's almost like,
you keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Exactly. You know, all these gurus are out there saying, be authentic, be yourself, show people the real you. And to me, I don't disagree with that, but that's about as helpful as if you can think back to your first day of junior high or maybe your first day of high school when you were maybe nervous about going into a new place and trying to fit in with new people. And mom or dad, booted you out of the car on your first day and said, just be yourself, honey. That's all you need to do. I'm guessing you probably did not turn around and say, wow, thanks, mom and dad. I appreciate that. I had no idea how to handle this situation, but just be myself. No, if you're anything like me, you just kind of rolled your eyes and just went on your way. And that's what I feel like when all these gurus are out there saying, just be yourself, because I'm going to come out and say it. Being yourself is hard. It is hard. It takes a lot of introspection and a lot of effort and a lot of care. And actually, my friend Shelley Roth, a couple of years ago, wrote an excellent book on this topic, and she called it, love the title, she called it Get Real, People. And it was just about this issue of authenticity. And actually, Shelley goes into translating that realness, the real you, into your online presence through what she calls digital body language. And it's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it if you would like to pick it up. It's still available on Amazon. But Shelley, in her book, says being real is a gift. And I love that because, it should be the most natural thing in the world, but it's not. It really is a gift to be able to be yourself and to show people the real you. And there's actually a quote in this book that I really love that I'm going to share with you right now. It's on page 26. Shelley writes, "The real self, the higher self, is in the middle of the spectrum. Not boastful, not bashful, just being. Being present, no agendas, no outcomes, no future, no past, just present." And I love that because it really encapsulates what we mean or what we should mean when we talk about being ourselves. So, I want to expand on this idea of authenticity a little bit and just talk about, I've picked out 3 of the challenges that we come up against when these glib thought leaders or these gurus tell us to be ourselves. The first challenge is finding that fine line between being authentic and TMI. And if you haven't heard TMI means too much information. If someone is out there sharing every single iota of information on Facebook, is showing every, this is the meal I had, this is my haircut, and on and on and on. And the goal is, the goal of authenticity is to show the real you that is maybe separate from your business. It's who are you when you're not quote unquote on, when you're not making a sales presentation in front of a client. Who are you when you're backstage, if you want to think about it that way. And I struggle with this myself. How much of yourself do you share without people kind of rolling their eyes and say, okay, get on with it? And as an example, I talk about my dogs frequently on this podcast. And recently I got a message from a very nice gentleman named Jim, who is not a fan of all the dog talk. He said this very, very nicely in a nice email that he sent me. He said, I really enjoy the podcast. I enjoy the content, and I would just like a little more focus on the meat. And Jim, I got to thank you for that comment, and I appreciate that because really, when I do this podcast, I am sitting all by myself in front of a microphone, and I cannot, I can't see people's reaction. I have no idea how this is coming across. And the only way I can find that out is when people choose to share their feedback with me. So, and really none of us can make everybody happy, but we can at least take that feedback and kind of strive for balance between really sharing ourselves and maybe going overboard and sharing a little bit too much about the non-business side. Challenge number 2 that I want to talk about is being yourself while still being professional. Now, part of authenticity is showing that we're not perfect. Maybe sharing some mistakes, sharing some misjudgments, sharing some past experiences that taught us a lot because we might have handled them badly. But the question is, where do you draw the line? Because one thing that we all need to think about is that, especially when we're out there in social media, any particular piece of content that we share could be someone's first impression of us. So, if you're out there putting out content, anything that you put could be someone's maybe only impression of you. And so if you're out there sharing some mistakes, there might be some that you might not want to make public. And one example that I can think of off the top of my head is that, maybe you made a mistake, maybe you miscommunicated with a client and wound up missing a deadline. It's human. It happens, of course. I would not necessarily want to share that, put that out as a tweet or a Facebook post, because what if someone sees that as their first impression of me? Oh, almost missed a deadline with my client. Well, that doesn't make me look very good. And and again, we're talking about balance. I can't be obsessed with what people think of me, and I am trying to be myself, but we've got to be very careful because there is a PR side to all that we're doing, and we need to make sure that nothing that we share when we're out there being our true selves, nothing in that detracts from how people see us and how people's desire to know more about us, maybe to do business with us. I'm hoping that makes sense. This is the least structured podcast I've ever done. So if I'm rambling, just please bear with me. I hope you'll find some good nuggets here. The third challenge I want to talk about is, of course, being yourself. If you happen to be a solopreneur, you are your brand. I mean, whether you choose to go by your own name or if you've chosen a brand name, but you are your brand, and your brand's personality is your personality. But when we talk about being yourself, what does that mean if you're representing a huge company that employs maybe tens of thousands of people? And this actually came up in the Q&A of a presentation I gave this week for the Houston Interactive Marketing Association. And, I gotta say, being yourself is enough of a challenge when you're just one person, but what if you're producing content for a huge brand that represents possibly tens of thousands of people in societies all over the world? How do you even wrap your arms around that? And, it was a great question. I'm glad the person asked. And the best way I can answer that is to really know your brand's personality. Regardless of how big or how small your company is, it still has a personality. It still has a vibe. And, the classic example of this is IBM and Apple. IBM is straight up business, no nonsense, straightforward. And then Apple is more lifestyle, more kind of loosey-goosey, skateboarding along with your iPod or what have you. And neither one is better or worse. I mean, I know if I were buying, let's say, servers for a hospital, I would want the straight-laced business company more than the kind of loosey-goosey lifestyle stuff. But it's really important to establish your brand's character and really talk about how you want to appear to people. And when I work with a new client, we go into a lot of detail about brand personality. And one little exercise that's a lot of fun that I go through with them is that I ask them to choose the ideal spokesperson for your brand. If you could have any spokesperson for, who has been around for the last, let's say, 30 years, who would you choose? Would you choose, let's say, a Tom Brokaw, who is very, intelligent and knowledgeable and very, very straight, kind of straight-laced, not meaning that as a not meaning any in a negative way, but, very straight-laced? Or would you be more Lady Gaga, kind of out there and a risk taker and, maybe a little of an exhibitionist, a little bit, craving attention? Who would you choose? And that exercise really helps us kind of gauge what that personality is. So that's something that I encourage you to explore. It's a fun exercise. So those are the three challenges that I see. And of course, there are many, many more. Like I said, being yourself is hard. And so with that in mind, I want to share a few things that I've learned about being authentic. The first thing is to take time for some self-assessment. And the best way to do that is just set aside some time, maybe half an hour. Turn off your computer, turn off your cell phone, no electronics, no interruptions, and just take a pad of paper, maybe sit out in your backyard if you're having some nice weather and enjoy a little fresh air. But take a pad of paper and a pen and write at the top of the pad, at the top of the piece of paper, whatever your brand name is, : So if I were doing this, I would write Resonance is, : And then just kind of brainstorm about the characteristics of your brand, or the most important characteristics of your brand. And then you look at that list of those characteristics, and it could be adjectives, it could be a simile. Resonance is like a cone of cotton candy. I don't know, that's off the top of my head. And just kind of brainstorm those characteristics, and then look through your list and look at what should be coming through in your content, and what does come through in your content, and what you need to work on. And then maybe some things should be separate from your content. And the example I use for that is, maybe questions of faith, or maybe questions of politics, maybe some hot button questions that can only stir up controversy and have nothing to do with your business. And, I've touched on the fact that my faith is a tremendous part of my business, but I don't go into detail about it because it turns a lot of people off, and it's just not part of the image that I represent. Not everyone feels that way. Some people are very open about their faith or their religious beliefs, but that's just my perspective. The second thing I've learned is to take quote-unquote best practices with a grain of salt. So I am constantly getting questions like, what's the ideal length of a blog post? Or how long should my podcast be? And my answer to that is whatever you need to cover the topic in the depth that you need to cover it. And, there are some wonderful podcasts that are maybe 5 minutes per episode, and there are some that are an hour and a half or even longer, and they both serve their audiences very well. So, if you happen to see, your blog post should be 500 words, or your podcast should not go beyond 30 minutes, just kind of take that with a grain of salt and realize that, realize the dangers of kind of shoehorning yourself into a practice that might not be the best for you, for your brand. Third thing I want to share, and this specifically has to do with writing. I think you need to know the rules of writing, of good grammar, and definitely of good spelling. But I gotta say, people talk to me all the time, and when they find out that I'm a writer by background and by trade, they say, oh, I should have you go over my stuff, because I'm not a good writer. I just write like I talk. And I tell them, please don't ever lose that. Being able to write like you talk is a true gift. And I remind them, we're not writing term papers here. We are writing blog posts that people have to read and respond to. But you still got to know the rules, and you've got to be very conscious when you break those rules. And, an example I saw on Facebook yesterday is that someone said, yes, you can end a sentence with a preposition. And yes, we can. It's not, if you go by the grammar book that we studied in 8th grade, I know in Catholic school, our 8th grade English was all about grammar. And, it says not to end a sentence with a preposition, but I'm reminded of an exchange that involved Sir Winston Churchill many years ago. And I don't know if this was legend or not, but supposedly he ended a sentence with a preposition and someone corrected him. And he responded, and I quote, "That is the sort of nonsense up with which I shall not put." So, and if we do that, if we, abide by those rules very strictly, sometimes the writing can come off as very stilted. So my advice to you with writing, know the rules, know what good grammar is, but just know that we do have some flexibility, and you need to know the rules so that you know when you're breaking them, and you do that deliberately. The fourth thing I want to share, in all things, in all matters of business, my advice is to trust your gut. Trust your instincts. And, I had to endure a lot of years of education to learn how to trust my gut. And if you hear about the latest fad and it just doesn't sit right with you, it doesn't feel like you, it just doesn't sit right, then you do not need to get on that bandwagon. For example, one of the big trends that it's not really a trend, it's more of a practice that you might hear about in content marketing is something called newsjacking. So if something is going on in the news, something that's getting a lot of buzz, that a lot of people are talking about, you can kind of latch onto that and kind of spin it into an angle for your content. So if, and I'm trying to think, the nearest thing that comes to mind is the Olympics a year ago. If the Olympics are big, you might write a blog post, 10 things the Olympics taught me about content marketing or something like that. But And I certainly engage in that if it's appropriate, but I am not going to shoehorn my content into every news story that comes around. That just that doesn't sit right with me. Some people are much better, can do that all the time and spin out blog posts about relevant news topics all the time. I don't, if it's not directly related, I kind of feel funny doing that. Another thing is that, another example that I want to share is if you follow Dan Zarella, who is the social media scientist for HubSpot. He does a lot of research about what gets attention in social media and what promotes responses and retweets and things like that. And he has found that if you add the phrase "please retweet" or "please RT" to your tweets, they're actually much more likely to get retweeted. Well, for me at least, unless I'm sharing some kind of public service announcement or something that I feel people really need to know, yeah, I'll put "please retweet" in front of it. But just for my own content, that to me just feels really, really needy. And, I just don't feel right about doing that. So again, whatever comes along, whatever trends come up, just trust your gut and see if it feels right with you. And it will serve your content in the long run if you say no to the right things in addition to saying yes to others. And the final thing I want to say is that when you're choosing what to talk about in your content, when you're choosing those topics to cover in your blog or your podcast or possibly your ebook, there are two reasons why we might reject an idea, or two reasons I might reject an idea. The first reason would be everybody's already talked about it, and the second reason would be that nobody's talking about it. And even if you are looking at a topic that has been covered by everyone in your industry, you still have a unique perspective to share. So, I wouldn't shy away from a topic just because it's been covered by a lot of people. Just make sure that whatever you're sharing is your unique perspective. Because the people who follow you, who follow your blog, who subscribe to your podcast or your e-newsletter, yeah, they're subscribing for your information, but they also want your perspective. They like what you have to say, even if you're saying something that has already been said by someone else. There is value in that unique perspective, and people will appreciate that. So those are my kind of hazy, discombobulated thoughts on authenticity. I really hope that you got something useful out of that. And again, if you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend that you pick up Shelley's book. It's called Get Real People, and it is available on Amazon. And if you can't find it by the title, you can search by the author's name. That is Shelley with an E, Shelley, and her last name is Roth, Roth. And I will also include a link to it in the blog post. So let me know what you think about authenticity. I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave me a note in the blog post or shoot me an email or a tweet and let me know your thoughts about authenticity. Okay, now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. For today's tip, I want to talk about cross-promoting your various social media channels. And that means when I talk about your channels, I talk about your Facebook, your Twitter, your LinkedIn, your YouTube, whatever it is you're doing out there. And all this means is to make sure that people who follow you on all your various channels. If someone is following you on Facebook, you want to try and encourage them to also follow you on Twitter, on LinkedIn, to subscribe to your YouTube channel, what have you. And sometimes we kind of make assumptions about people that they, if they know about us on YouTube, they automatically are following us on Facebook and Twitter and these other channels. But one thing that I have learned in social media is that if you want someone to do something, you have to ask them to do it, definitely. So what I advise you to do is, for example, every once in a while, put out a Facebook post asking, are you following us on Twitter? And give the URL of your Twitter profile. And then also do that, on LinkedIn and, maybe in your e-newsletter and some other outposts. And you can do these cross-promoting posts across all your networks. So if you're promoting, again, your Twitter feed, you want to promote that on a post on Facebook and also on LinkedIn. And, maybe even on Pinterest, share a funny photo and include your Twitter feed. This is something that I need to remind myself all the time to do because I just never think about promoting those other social channels, but it is definitely important. I do want to cover a couple of caveats to keep in mind. Number one, I would say don't try to cram all of your social networks into a single post. So I wouldn't do a single Facebook post saying, hey, follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter, subscribe on YouTube. And the reason is, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I find that when people are confronted with too many choices, they tend to choose nothing and to just kind of, I'll do that later and go on to the next thing. So just keep that in mind. Another caveat that I want to talk about is please don't overdo it, because remember, this is promotion. It's not directly selling anything, but you are promoting those other networks. So please use that carefully. You might want to do maybe one promotion for one network once a month and just kind of keep that in your regular rotation to be promoting all those various social media channels. Okay, campers, that is it for me this week. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. I've certainly enjoyed our time together, even if we're not in the same room. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you like what you've heard today, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or through our RSS feed. And again, I'll provide that link in the blog post. And if you really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review in iTunes. I would so appreciate hearing that from you. For more information about content marketing, you're welcome to visit our blog at resonancecontent.com/blog, where you'll also find links to our pages on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and other social networks. And if you'd like to email me a question to cover in an upcoming tip of the week or even in an upcoming main podcast section, I would love to hear that from you, and you can contact me anytime at rachel@resonancecontent.com. Also, if you'd like for me to come speak about content marketing to your business or your organization, you can find information on my most current talk at contentmarketingspeaker.net. Again, that's .net, not .com, and it's Content Marketing Speaker, all one word. As always, I'd like to leave you with a quote, and today's quote is definitely related to our theme of authenticity, and this is from Nathaniel Hawthorne. He says, "No one man can, for any considerable time, wear one face to himself and another to the multitude without finally getting bewildered as to which one is the true one." Great words about authenticity. Again, this is Rachel Parker with Resonance Content Marketing, and we will see you again next week. Take care.